All right, so are you ready to dive in? Because
Correct.
today we're talking ride sharing, Uber, Lyft, all that. But we're going deep, like way beyond just, ordering a ride. We've got a whole bunch of news articles, and they are honestly kind of disturbing. You
Yeah.
think, ride sharing, think again. It's
Yeah.
not all just, convenience and getting from point A to point B. There's a whole lot lurking under the surface.
Yeah, exactly. Like when you think about it, it does make you wonder what can go wrong, right? And we're going to get into all that. Because those, like those little incidents you hear about, those might be signs of like bigger problems.
So let's start with something. I mean, it's a tough topic, but we got to talk about it. Sexual assault and ride sharing. There's this case of Shengfu Wu, a Lyft driver who was accused of assaulting a 13-year-old girl. And Lyft policy is super clear, like riders have to be 18 or older. So how did this even happen? And it makes you really question, like those background checks they do and age verification. Like how effective is all that really?
Right. And it's not just, one bad apple. This case brings up something way bigger, that power imbalance in ride sharing. Think about it. You're alone in a car with a complete stranger, often late at night, and the driver's in control of everything. It's a situation that, sadly, some people take advantage of.
Yeah. And it's not just Lyft either. There's Cesar Martell. He's an Uber driver. He's facing a bunch of sexual assault charges, and they have DNA evidence linking him to a few different cases. It's scary to think, you think you're getting into a safe ride, like they vet these drivers, but then it turns out it's not safe at all. And it's often not just a one-time thing either.
No, it's not. And the Martell case is particularly disturbing because Uber, they have all these safety measures, but clearly something's not working right. So are those measures even enough? And who's responsible here? Is it just the companies, or do passengers need to be way more careful too?
It's scary. But you're right. Awareness is so important.
Yeah.
And then there's the case of Jose Antonio Canales Sanchez, another Uber driver accused of sexual battery and false imprisonment. But this time it's a little different. This woman, she fought back. She scratched him, punched him, and that left evidence. So it helped her story,
Right. And that's a good reminder. You're not totally powerless in these situations. You can fight back. And it's crucial to report these things, even if it doesn't, get physical.
Yeah.
Because it helps build a picture of
Right.
the driver's behavior. And it might protect other riders in the future.
Absolutely. So we've seen how ride sharing can, create opportunities for these bad actors.
Yeah.
But what about organized crime? Like whole groups using it for illegal stuff. We actually have an article about this Uber driver. We'll call him Adam. He was totally clueless and ended up transporting drugs through Uber Connect. He picks up a package, just doing his job, and then later finds out it was full of oxycodone. Can you imagine?
That's wild. And the thing is with services like Uber Connect, they don't really inspect packages like, the regular delivery companies.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a loophole for people who want to move illegal things. And this Adam guy, his experience with Uber was a whole other mess. He said they were slow to respond and gave him mixed messages. Makes you wonder, how do they handle these situations? And what kind of support do drivers actually get?
It's a good question. And according to U.S. Attorney Matt Graves, there are cases where drivers themselves are actually using ride sharing to sell drugs. I mean, think about it. Suddenly those late night ride requests seem a little more suspicious, don't they?
Definitely. And that just shows how hard it is to regulate these platforms. You've got millions of rides deliveries happening every day. How do you monitor all that? How do you make sure it's safe and prevent crime, but also, not make it super intrusive for everyone?
It's a tough balance. You want the convenience, but you also don't want to be, unknowingly involved in something illegal or putting yourself in danger.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another worrying aspect. The way law enforcement sometimes targets drivers, especially immigrant drivers.
Yeah, this is where things get really complicated. We've got some insights here from Gretchen Taylor-Poussin. She's a trial attorney, and she's noticed this trend that's kind of disturbing. Police stings targeting Uber and taxi drivers. A lot of them are immigrants with limited English, and they're being targeted for solicitation of prostitution.
Wow. So think about it. You're in a new country, you don't fully understand the language or the customs, and then you get caught in a situation where a simple misunderstanding can land you in huge legal trouble. It's just not right.
Yeah, and she gave this example of one of her clients, an immigrant driver. He was taking a break in his car. Undercover officer approaches him, and there's a language barrier. He totally misinterpreted her questions. And guess what? He got arrested for solicitation.
It's insane, and those cases raise some serious questions about how fair and effective these tactics really are. Is it ethical to target a specific group of people, especially people who are already vulnerable? And are these stings actually doing anything to stop prostitution? Or are they just creating more victims? These are things we'll definitely be exploring more as we go deeper into the dark side of ride sharing.
Yeah, it's like they're almost setting them up to fail.
Yeah, and Poussin argues that they focus on areas where, prostitution is already a problem. So basically any driver who works in those areas, regardless of, if they're actually involved or not, they're more likely to be targeted. It makes you wonder if the goal is really about reducing prostitution or just, making arrests. And often it's at the expense of people who are already struggling.
Yeah, it's a really disturbing thought and makes you think, if they really want to combat prostitution, shouldn't they be focusing on the people who are actually soliciting or
Yeah.
exploiting others?
Yeah.
It's not the drivers
Yeah.
who might just be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right. It's a complicated issue for sure. But we have to acknowledge that in these disproportionately target vulnerable populations, it creates this climate of mistrust and fear, and it further alienates people who are already, you know, trying to navigate a new culture and language.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the dangers for passengers, but what about the drivers themselves? They're out there alone in their cars, often late at night,
Yeah.
sometimes with passengers who are, intoxicated. That's got to be a pretty vulnerable position to be in too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Drivers face a whole set of risks themselves, everything from verbal abuse to physical assault. And while Uber and Lyft, they do have some safety features like GPS tracking and those emergency buttons. It feels like they could be doing more to protect the drivers.
Yeah, I agree. Do you think they're doing enough to support drivers?
Yeah.
Especially in cases where they've been, victims of crime or harassment?
It's hard to say, to be honest. There's not a lot of transparency around how they handle complaints. Or you know how they support drivers' well-being in general.
Reading through all these articles, it's clear that ride sharing is a lot more complicated than it seems. I mean, yeah, it's convenient, but it's like opening a Pandora's box.
Sure.
You've got individual bad actors, organized crime, and then law enforcement practices that raise all these ethical questions. It definitely makes you think twice before you order that next ride.
It really does, and I think it's easy to forget that behind those apps, those few taps on your phone, there are real people on both sides, and they both have their own vulnerabilities and risks.
So we've uncovered this dark side of ride sharing. But what do we do with this information? Is it even possible to make it safer without losing all the convenience that made it so popular in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's not about demonizing the technology or shutting it all down. Ride-sharing has been a game changer for transportation, and it does have a lot of benefits. But we need to move past just focusing on convenience and really start thinking about the bigger picture, the societal and ethical implications of this whole industry.
Right, so what can we do as individuals? How do we mitigate these risks? Is it just about being more aware and vigilant, or is there something more proactive we can do?
Awareness is definitely a good starting point. Pay attention to your surroundings, share your ride details with someone, trust your gut feeling if something feels off. Those are all things you can do to stay safe. But it can't stop there. We need to demand more from the companies themselves.
What would that look like? Are we talking about better background checks, stricter regulations, or maybe some kind of new technology?
I think it's all of the above, honestly. Better ways to vet drivers' real-time ride monitoring. Clearer ways to report incidents if something happens. There are a lot of different avenues to explore, and we can't forget about driver support. Rideshare companies need to do more to make sure their drivers are safe, both physically and emotionally.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. It's a good reminder that convenience isn't free, and it's up to all of us to demand better and safer experiences for everyone involved.
I completely agree. We can't just accept these risks. As part of the deal, we have to push for change individually and collectively.
Something that wasn't really addressed in these articles, but I think it's worth thinking about, is the potential for riders to work together. What if there was a way to share safety tips and experiences, or even create a separate rating system for drivers?
That's a really interesting idea, like a platform where riders can share information and hold each other accountable, almost like a watchdog group for ride-sharing safety.
Exactly. It could empower riders to make smarter choices and maybe hold both drivers and the companies accountable in a way that goes beyond those star ratings they have now.
It's a really thought-provoking concept, and it shows that we as users, we have the power to make ride-sharing safer and more equitable.
This deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about. The world of ride-sharing is way more complex than it seems. But even with all the risks, there's still hope for positive change.
Definitely remember, knowledge is power. By understanding the dangers and having these conversations and advocating for better practices, We can help shape the future of ride-sharing for the better.
Yeah, it's like we need to flip the script, not just between riders and drivers, but between us, the users, and these huge companies. We put so much trust in them, it's time they stepped up and actually earned it.
Right, and that trust has to start with transparency. Like, what if they were more upfront about their safety stuff?
Yeah.
How they handle things when something goes wrong? What are they actually doing to protect riders and drivers?
Totally, it would make you feel a lot better.
Yeah.
Knowing they're not just hiding problems. But what about the government? Law enforcement, what role do they play in all this? Do you think we need more rules for the ride-sharing industry?
I definitely think we need a smarter approach to regulation. It's not about, killing innovation or making things harder for companies. It's about making sure they meet some basic safety standards and protecting the rights of everyone involved, passengers and drivers.
Yeah, because right now it feels like they're operating in this weird gray area, like the technology is way ahead of the laws.
That happens a lot with new technology. It takes time for the rules to catch up. But in this case, it's a big deal. We're talking about people's safety.
It's true. This whole conversation has really got me thinking about how much we value convenience. We want things to be easy and fast and cheap. But what are we giving up for that? Are we sacrificing something more important?
That's a question we should all be asking ourselves, not just with ride-sharing, but with any new technology. What are the potential downsides? And are we okay with those risks?
At the end of the day, I think ride-sharing isn't inherently good or bad. It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used in different ways. The important thing is to understand how it works and make smart choices.
I agree. It's not about saying no to the technology altogether. It's about using it responsibly and making sure the companies that are profiting from it are putting safety and accountability first.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the dark side of ride-sharing, I hope we haven't scared you off completely. Our goal wasn't to scare you, but to make you aware, so you can make safer choices.
Exactly. Remember, you have a voice. You can make a difference by supporting companies that prioritize safety, by speaking up for better regulations, and most importantly, by staying informed and talking about this with others.
It's about starting a conversation, asking questions, and demanding better from the platforms we use. And who knows, maybe if we all speak up loud enough, we can make real change happen in the ride-sharing industry. That's all for our deep dive this time. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep diving deep.
As always, subscribe to our channel,